A ver qué tal. Buenas, bienvenidos a este vídeo de implantdivino.net, por así decir, y estamos aquí con Claudia y Ana C, como ayer, que estábamos viendo la continuación del taller de la ira, el segundo día, con cosas tan importantes también sobre la crianza, etcétera. Bueno, pues vamos a saludar, si queréis, a saludar a vuestro amado público y seguimos. Ana C, ¿qué tal en Venezuela? ¿A que ha habido una noche de sueños por ahí?
Sí, bueno, hablando de todo un poco, el clima está muy agradable. Amanece como de 20 grados y durante el día pues ya se va poniendo caluroso. Bueno, no caluroso así, va entrando más en calor. Bien, me siento bien, muy nutritiva el video anterior, lo que hemos leído, me ha servido muchísimo. Gracias, Iván.
Sí, lo de ayer está muy aparte, muy bueno. Y tú, Claudia, por ahí con los calores del Chaco, 20 grados más que tenemos.
Pero tuvimos una lluvia refrescante, así que sí, tenemos un impasse ahí. Sí, sirve como para salir a la superficie, tomar aire, así que bien, agradecida.
Y acá también llovió, acá una lluviecita, por acá, por estos lados. Fue colectiva.
Sí. Bueno, pues sigamos entonces, a ver qué ya me decís.
Okay.
So allow yourself to feel your emotion. And then behind you.
I was just wondering, with that call and the anger, the emotion of I'm unloving, or I'm unloved. Now, that anger, is that the causal that you were talking about yesterday to get it out for releasing?
No. This anger is like an adult anger that I'm using to get away from the cause. So this is the childhood emotion I need to release, and this anger is the adult anger that I'm using to actually cover over that. The child anger, if I have child anger, it will be down here somewhere in the list of wrappers, if you like. What's wrapped around this emotion. Because normally what happens when we have a causal emotion at a childhood level that we're not allowed to release when we're a child, we immediately put anger around that emotion.
So is that deeper again?
That's deeper again. So it's like there's the adult anger, and then there's some other emotions of blockages, which is usually how do other people think of me. You know, I'm not going to be able to do this, and a lot of other things like that. And then we get down to, I'm really angry as a child about being unloved. And then there's the feeling of being unloved. And that's the feeling in the end that we're aiming for. The feeling that we're aiming to release is the feeling that created all of these other things. That and the reason why we created all these other things is because we wanted to protect that feeling of being unloved. Does it make sense?
I've become very aware that I suppress anger because I have a feeling that I'll end up all alone, and I somehow won't cope with that. It would be sort of almost like dying.
Okay, so there's a deep emotional belief in you. So we could say the deep core of belief is that I'm alone. And I had a deep core belief that I'm nothing to anybody. Right? Now, those things are not true in that there are many spirit friends around you who feel that who are always with you. And of course, God's always with you, wanting a relationship with you. And God certainly doesn't believe you're nothing. But you believe it. And it comes from your childhood, and it is an emotion that you need to allow yourself to feel. So if you're using anger to not get away from that emotion, then start seeing the relationship between your anger and that emotion and say, oh, I'm just angry again because again I don't want to be alone. You know, even if you just tell yourself that message, you're going to be one step further towards feeling the feeling of alone and allowing yourself to feel it. The truth is that none of us are alone, ever. But you're not going to feel that truth until you release that emotion. Until you release that emotion, you're going to believe there is a state in your life where you could be totally alone. And my feelings of being alone were so great that there was a time in my physical life, in this life, where I was totally alone. My parents wouldn't speak to me, my children wouldn't speak to me, none of my friends would speak to me. I lived alone, and I lived and I didn't have any work because I was so in my emotional turmoil at the time, quite suicidal, totally alone. And that's how much alone feeling I had to deal with. And then it took me about a year or so of processing in that state to get through that feeling and release that feeling of being just totally alone. Nobody wants me, the feeling. Nobody cares about me. And the truth for my life was that that's exactly the truth. At that moment, nobody did. And that's the irony of dealing with a lot of these emotions, is you'll find actually that the truth is in those situations, just like the truth with the mum cooking the meal, is no, right at that moment, her family are not loving her. Right at that moment, she's not experiencing love, she feels unloved, and she's right. She is unloved, and she needs to feel that. But it's the unloved feeling that creates the attraction. Does that make sense? Like, this is the thing we've got to understand. So it was my deep alone feeling, which was so great that it created a situation in my life where I was totally alone. That nobody wanted anything to do with it. Every single person I knew. And I had to then just allow myself to feel that feeling, which took some time to do, obviously. Now, as I dealt with that feeling, people started coming into my life again. So the first ones that started coming into my life were my sons. They came back into my life, and then the next ones that then I attracted a partner, and then you know what I mean. So things started happening. Then I started getting friends that I'd never had before. They were starting to attract into my life, but only after I dealt with that feeling of being totally alone. My suggestion is don't wait that long. Like I was pretty stubborn on that emotion. So stubborn that I had to actually be totally alone in my life physically before I deal with the emotion. My suggestion is don't wait that long. You know, if you feel the feeling of I'm alone just in an instant, let yourself go into the feeling. Straight away, rather than waiting for years and years until you get to a point where you are totally that thing.
Quite a few years ago, I went through that alone. It was like I was so invisible that God didn't even know I existed.
Yeah.
And I stayed with that, and then it was like I was hiding from God. And then to know that that was not so was hysterical, and I burst out laughing and laughing.
Yeah.
But yet, I'm wondering, is there another cause? Because I still am afraid of being shunned or rejected or not seen. So it seems like all of that would have gone in that instant, but it's not.
This is the thing to understand about core emotion. If the core emotion that you feel you're dealt with is the cause of your life, then instantly your life will change.
O sea, aquí es, si era esa emoción la causa de tu vida, que dice literalmente the cause of your life, entonces tu vida cambiará al instante.
But if the core emotion is deeper than that or has more facets to it, your life will not change. So that your law of attraction tells you straight away whether you have actually released the core emotion or not. So the answer obviously for yourself is no, there's more to this core emotion. And maybe you burst out laughing just at the time that there was something deeper there. Because often that is the case where we revert to humour in order to cover over our emotion as well. So allow yourself to just experiment and pray about that a little more and allow yourself to dig a bit deeper into that. And it may not be related to God, but you may find that it's related to you and how you view you. And in fact, you'll find many of your emotions will actually be related to how you view yourself, rather than how other people view you. For example, if a lot of this, like, I'm unlovable, basically what I'm doing when I'm saying that, you know, I'm unlovable, there's this projection coming out of me as you don't love me for the world. If I'm unlovable, then there's a projection coming out of me, you don't love me. Now, there's also an emotion inside of me, a deep emotional belief inside of me that I am totally unable to be loved. Does that make sense? And that will be under the I'm unlovable emotion. So I'm unlovable can actually finish up being a capping emotion. And underneath the I'm unlovable is there's something so bad or wrong with me that I'm actually unable to be loved. So even if
O sea, por debajo de esa emoción, no soy querible, esta otra que habría que poner entre comillas, esta otra emoción, ponemos aquí, hay esto de, oye, es que hay algo tan malo en mí. Espera que se ha ido con el ratón, no sé qué ha pasado aquí. Algo tan malo o incorrecto en mí que en realidad soy incapaz de ser amado.
like somebody could love me, they can't because I'm unable to be loved. Right, so there's some really deep causal emotions. So you may find that there's these layers of some of these really deep core emotions that you need to dig deeper into. It's your law of attraction that tells you that it's not done yet. As soon as your law of attraction changes, you know, I've dealt with a fair bit there now. You know, I can feel my law of attraction changing. Everything's starting to be different. So that means I'm getting to the core of this now. I'm really getting to the underlying emotion now. If my law of attraction isn't changing, then it means that I'm yet to really pinpoint the underlying emotion. So more prayer about it, you know, more longing to God about giving you the answers about what's going on. And of course, if I'm not getting to a core, then usually it means that I do not want to yet get to the core. So there's usually fear associated with the core. So, for example, I've gone through the emotion that I am unable to be loved by my soulmate. It's just like she's never going to love me. And then in that emotion, I found a lot of basic core emotions. One of the core emotions that I dealt with even just recently was she won't be able to love me because the other times that she's loved me, I was perfect. Now I'm not perfect. She's not going to be able to love that. Does that make sense? So that was one facet of that emotion. And there are other facets of that emotion that I need to work through. Okay. So they're all beliefs about myself in the end that I'm projecting onto my soulmate. But I'm saying she will have this feeling when in fact Mary doesn't have that feeling. It's me that has that feeling. Does that make sense? Yep. Up right at the back. Thanks, Karen.
Could you address persecution under that heading of rejection and I'm unlovable? Like that slave that was talking, so say you had come to her while she was in the box being physically hidden away in the shed and told her all those things. And she...
It was a male.
Sorry. And addressed, so she addressed, or he addressed all those emotions, but physically he's still being persecuted. What would have happened to him, and also related to us as well? So those core emotions of persecution. So when we get down to them, like what you were saying, your deeper emotion was dead when it comes, and it was all to do with money. So you were killed because you were persecuted for people's beliefs about money.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get over those deeper fears of the world where we know we're going to be persecuted? And in Australia it doesn't happen, but I can see the wider world where it's happening all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's happened for our grandfathers. We're celebrating our Anzac Day, and they've gone through their lives,
Yes.
living their whole lives have been revolved around this persecution.
Yes. And the answer is that what we see as truth is not what God sees as truth. Remember, on this path, what you're looking at is what is God's truth, not what is your own truth. So when I was in the first century being hung on the stake, I wasn't looking at, I didn't have an emotion then of feeling persecuted.
Yeah.
Because I knew that I wasn't.
No.
Because I knew God's truth, and that was that my soul was still free no matter what people tried to do to my material body. Does that make sense? So if I was believing that I was persecuted in that moment, it would be because I had a false belief inside of myself that needs to be released in that moment, that I can choose to release. So getting back to your example about the slave spirit, what it could have done in that state in the shed is he could have fully released his fear and terror, and underneath the fear and terror would be the feeling of being persecuted or being tortured. And he could have released that emotion completely and allowed himself to get into a state of complete calm. Now, he couldn't do that given the emotional injuries that he already had. He would have to have been pretty close to a run with God to actually do that, but that's something that could occur. So often when we're looking at situations here on the earth, we're saying, to ourselves, well, this is how it really is now, and we don't see how God sees it. We're only seeing it how we're seeing it. So he could have chosen to go into his emotions, and if he released the causal emotion of being persecuted, the slave owner, the master, would have probably chosen another person to imprison in that way, rather than if the master didn't change his emotion, he would have chosen another person rather than that person, because that person's law of attraction would have changed.
Bueno, podemos mirar eso del día de Anzac. Ahora no me acuerdo, lo miré rápidamente y es una persecución. Fuerzas armadas australiano-neozelandesas lucharon en Galípoli contra el Imperio Otomano durante la Primera Guerra Mundial. Y es para celebrar eso, todos los que mueren en las guerras o en el servicio. Es un festivo. Desembarcaron mal y murieron 10.000 entre los australianos y no sé qué, y 33.000 entre los británicos y tal. O sea que es simplemente eso. Supongo que no lo conocíais. Yo tampoco. Es australiano.
No, para nada, no conocía. Gracias.
Que la familiar...
Entendió el sentido, pero claro, está bueno ampliar.
Sí, se entendía ahí, que simplemente estaban viviendo ahí en emociones de ese tipo, sí. La familia de esta mujer.
Y esto, ya que estamos, digo, esto de que no vemos la verdad, o sea, lo que vemos como verdad no es lo que Dios ve como verdad, hace que perpetuemos, porque toda nuestra historia está basada en ese sistema de creencias. Entonces, como que esa misma celebración, entre comillas, no hace más que mantener esa vida.
Muchas de las veces son usadas políticamente, claro, todas esas cosas, incluso para crear estados nuevos, totalitarios, o sea, con la excusa de las víctimas, de los no sé cuántos. Sí, es muy perverso lo que se hace.
Mucho resentimiento, claro.
Sí.
Sí. Vivir en la herida sería claramente.
Sí. Bueno, pues vamos.
Dale.
See, the problem is today is the majority do not trust law of attraction. That's really the issue here. We don't believe, many of us do not have a belief in our hearts that if I change a causal emotion, my law of attraction will change. We don't have that belief. It is a truth that we do not believe. And so what we do then is we justify. We say, oh, what's the point in me feeling this emotion of rejection? Nothing is going to change in my life if I feel that emotion. And I will have just cried for 4 weeks or 8 weeks or however long it's going to take to feel this emotion, and nothing will change. I don't have a hope or a belief inside of me that anything will change. But the truth is that if I do deal with that core emotion, something will actually change instantly, and I've never had that experience my entire life of seeing the relationship between changing a core emotion and seeing the law of attraction change. So until you have your first experience of your law of attraction changing, you won't believe what I'm saying to you. Until you go through that emotion.
Yeah, I believe that. It's just
no, I'm sorry, but you do not. Your question tells me you do not. So, see, this is where we can often tell ourselves in our mind, like that we believe something, but that belief is yet to fully enter our heart. That belief is fully entered our heart. So in your case, you believe completely in your mind that if you change a core emotion, your law of attraction will change. But in your heart, which drove your question, you do not believe the law of attraction will affect even an event where a man is in prison being persecuted. And I'm saying to you, yes, it will affect that event, just like it will affect every other event when the core emotion is dealt with. Does that make sense? Whereas at the moment in your heart, you don't see how that can be the case.
So that is the answer to give to all the politicians who are going off to Afghanistan and Iraq and are fighting all those wars because they're believing that they're fighting evil. But they just have to believe in what you're saying and everything will change.
Yes, everything will change. And the truth is that they are not fighting evil, they are creating more evil.
Mm.
That's what the truth is. And it's because of an emotion inside of themselves that they think they have the right to oppress another person in order to combat so-called evil. And they're actually now using evil to combat evil. That's what they're doing. And of course, it's never going to work. And that's why it never does work. And that's why all these wars keep on happening, because nobody wants to accept the truth. And it gets back down to this statement. If I'm getting the same results, then I'm not changing the course. And there's that other statement, how does it go? How stupid is it to keep doing the same thing over and over, getting the same result? And this is the trouble with the world today, is that we keep doing things, the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, hoping for a different result. And it's not going to happen that way. We need to actually start addressing it at the core level, the emotional level. So yes, all of the people who go to war and all the people who want to send them to war all need to change something at the emotional level in their belief structure. And when that happens, wars will cease. The law of attraction will change when that happens. And that starts with each of us doing it ourselves.
AJ, one of the things I found with my anger is that I had trouble coming to the core emotion, because to get to the core emotion, I felt I had to be vulnerable, you know, that sense of allowing myself. And when I went down that feeling of what does vulnerable mean to me, it's actually at the time when I was young and vulnerable that all these things happened.
Okay.
So
So what does vulnerable mean to you?
No protection, and all sorts of things come up when I go down there. It's like,
Yep.
where will you go? Who's protecting me? If my parents are meant to protect me?
Yep.
If I'm meant to be vulnerable, and I was vulnerable before, and all of these things happened. And a bit of that, like that rage of, well, what's the point of it all, you know? But, you know, I've been there and I've done that, and this is what it.
O sea, ¿qué sentido tiene eso de ser vulnerable, ¿no? ¿Dónde está el sentido, el punto en todo esto? Ya he estado allí, he hecho eso, y aquí es donde me llevo.
Sort of attitude.
Yep.
And so
Can I stop you there, though, for a second? And there's a big thing that's not factored into your reasoning, though. And that is that, who was your parent then? It was these parents who you were vulnerable to and they damaged you. They were your parents then. Who's your parents now? God's your parent now. And that's the thing, that you're not allowing yourself to be vulnerable with this new parent, God, who is able to protect you. Who is the only one probably on this planet who's able to love you, and the only one probably able to help you as well. And can you see the relationship there? If I believe that God is this new parent that can actually supply these different needs to me, and have some faith in that, then I'll be more tempted to go into the vulnerable space with God.
Yes, actually, I had a lot of blocks, and I still do, but with all the attempts I made, the only way I found really to get some way into it was to pray to God.
Exactly.
And constantly, even though I felt like not worthy enough for Him to hear me, or whether I really believed in God, because if I did, I wouldn't be doing what I did.
O sea, si ella creyera realmente en Dios, ella no estaría haciendo lo que ella hacía.
I just keep trying, and that has helped me access some of the emotions underneath.
Yes.
I still come back sometimes about the vulnerable and staying in the anger, and you know that.
Well, let's look at the vulnerable issue itself. What's happening is that you're opening up your vulnerability. You're attempting to, but you're still thinking it's aimed towards people on this earth. People, you know, towards people generally. The first person to open up your vulnerability towards is God, Because God is the only person that's going to accept your vulnerability without harming you. Does that make sense? And then allow yourself to actually demonstrate vulnerability, at least in that relationship. So that's the first relationship you want to demonstrate this vulnerability in. Once you demonstrate the vulnerability in the first relationship, then as God's love enters you and heals the emotion, you become reassured, in fact, that no matter what happens to you, God and you are always going to be together. No matter what happens to you around you. So it doesn't matter who treats you badly, who treats you well, God is still going to be the constant that's going to be, that you're going to be able to be completely open and vulnerable towards. And God's love is going to keep you secure in that place. And that's the emotion you're working through. And it's a very powerful emotion. When you get through that emotion, you'll find you'll feel very, very different about being vulnerable to everyone else. Because often it's the fear of being punished or the fear of being harmed again that causes to withdraw from being vulnerable. But if I know that I've got one person in this universe who I'll never get harmed from, and who will always love me no matter what happens to me, and I believe that in my heart, I have this feeling in my heart that that's true, then no matter what happens around me, it will never really affect me. Does that make sense? So allow yourself to start experiencing your vulnerability towards God first. So don't worry about it so much with everyone else. Focus on being completely open and vulnerable towards God first. And when you do that, a lot of God's love will enter you. You'll feel a secure bond between you and God. And that will actually allow you to begin being vulnerable with other people. And when you get vulnerable with other people, you'll find actually the same principles apply with your vulnerability with God. Actually, most people are attracted to it. And you'll find that that'll also then grow your confidence with regard to this being truthful in your own life.
¿Qué tal? ¿Necesitáis comentar algo para descansar o ir al servicio o algo? Esta parte es muy importante.
Bueno,
Identificada, Iván, justamente con esto último, esto de no pensar en los demás, que fue básicamente la estructura con la que edifiqué mi vida, en función de la opinión, de la retribución. Ayer hablábamos de la recompensa. Entonces, claro, que ese corrimiento que hacemos realmente es significativo. Yo no creo todavía, por lo que veo, ayer me contaba Ana C., y lo voy a contar acá, fuera de línea, nos compartía que ella estaba muy preocupada por mí en este regreso a mi casa después de la experiencia de haberme aislado voluntariamente de mi familia. Y claro, y me reflejó algo de lo que yo todavía estoy atrayendo, que es la emoción que siempre mi mamá tuvo en mí y tiene en ella de no confiar en mi capacidad. Y comprendí que de alguna forma era lo que yo todavía, como decía Jesús con la relación con Mary, es lo que yo tengo adentro y lo estoy proyectando hacia afuera. Y Ana me lo devolvía. Pero sin embargo, a pesar de eso, a pesar de que tuve esa retribución de Ana, y Ana me decía, estaba muy preocupada por vos, y de alguna manera me puedo ver en eso todavía, en mi falta de confianza también, este corrimiento pequeñito, este pequeño gesto, es lo que dice Jesús al final, contribuye en el hecho de ya ser más sincera con uno mismo, ¿no? De reconocer ese estado que en otro momento estaba absolutamente maquillado y disimulado y con todo lo opuesto. O sea, cualquiera que me podía ver decía, qué segura que es esa persona, qué solvente, porque era lo que había elegido, ¿no? Para simular todo lo opuesto.
Sí, es la fachada contra la vulnerabilidad, que está hecha con todos los trueques, empezando y terminando por el dinero y por todas las cosas que las hacemos un fin en vez de un medio, la cultura, el país, la nación, no sé qué, todo es lo mismo. Si lo miramos desde del punto de vista de Dios, ¿no? Dios está mirando eso y diciendo, vamos a ver, si eso lo estáis haciendo para no ser vulnerables al amor, que en realidad lo puede todo, si ponéis el foco en eso, ¿no? El amor y en la verdad, y sobre todo la relación con Dios, que vamos, si sabe todo lo que está pasando, sabe las necesidades, todas las energías, cómo van, cómo funcionan, lo que es mejor para todos, para ti, empezando para ti. Y mire, claro, y todo lo que hacemos es contra la vulnerabilidad.
Sí. Así que sí, fue como escucharme y escucharla, y sí, la verdad es que, como dice él, hasta que no experimentes, o sea, hasta que realmente no sientas el deseo, no te convences, no es la palabra, sí, no crees, o sea, no, todo el tiempo, y demuestra que no hay cambios. No tengo cambios radicales, así como dice él, toda la vida transformada, pero sí ha cambiado mucho en muchas cosas. Así que sí, en mucho digo, porque para lo que estaba al comienzo del proceso, sí, siento la diferencia. Que no es representativa, perdón, sí.
No, dilo, termina.
No es representativa en cuanto al nivel de transformación, que por ahí somos también muy rigurosos y escépticos, o sea, a ver, demuéstramelo, no, pero todavía estamos siempre ahí arrogantes, pero sí, en lo que yo anclo es empezar a decirme la verdad a mí de lo que yo creo que soy, que es como, a ver, ¿cómo lo puse acá? Lo anoté. La verdad está en las situaciones, y entonces dice, en realidad tiene que ver con la relación contigo y cómo te ves a ti misma en todas esas situaciones. O sea, por eso decía yo que tomé lo que Ana comentaba y digo, a ver, si Ana me dice esto, ¿qué es lo que yo estoy de alguna manera, porque sabemos que es así, digamos que hay una reciprocidad? Entonces, ¿qué es lo que yo estoy proyectando y viendo y creyendo de mí? Y sí, de alguna manera es así, así que todo sirve, todo contribuye, la ley, todos los eventos, a espejar, sí, de espejo, sí, claramente. Eso nomás, sí, gracias. Ana, te escucho.
Te digo, me ayudaste a verme con este comentario, porque realmente yo simplemente estaba mirando tu espejo, mirándome en ti. O sea, los temores eran para mí, pero yo los proyectaba para ti. Pero tú eras mi espejo de lo que soy.
Claro. Y yo busqué una madre sustituta. Sí.
Exacto,
sí,
reflejó, tú te reflejaste en mí, pero yo me reflejé en eso. Yo dije, pero lo que yo estoy haciendo es reflejarme.
Sí.
Reflejando mis miedos, mis temores.
Sí.
Gracias, Clau, qué bueno.
Sí, y lo puede ser que lo estamos haciendo para no ser vulnerables con Dios. Es decir, porque si en el momento en que sentimos eso, habláramos, aunque no tengamos fe, le decimos a Dios, como ha dicho en el taller hace un rato, si basta con que digas eso, a ver, tengo este enfado, ¿por qué tengo este enfado? Todo eso que ha dicho, que ahora no me acuerdo. Sí, entonces, primero es respirar ahí en la barriga y decir, a ver, yo estoy sintiendo esto, ¿por qué? Aunque se lo digas igualmente a Claudia o nos lo digamos, pero sí, abrir el diálogo ahí y porque sí, lo que nos gusta es estar a todos en la fachada, ¿no? Y comentando lo que nos parece a nosotros primero, pero no contamos con que, claro, aún no estamos en el yo real, no somos en unidad con Dios, por lo tanto, lo que nos parece a nosotros primero siempre va a ser para escindir la mente del corazón. Siempre vamos a estar así, jugando a eso.
Qué bueno, Iván, qué buen comentario.
Sí.
Claro, es así como que nos vamos de las primeras. O sea, con tal hablar, pero no estás hablando desde tu ser. Como dices tú, estás hablando de la fachada. Es correcto, eso está perfecto.
Sí.
Sí, que al mismo tiempo revela, porque justamente es muy importante verla, digamos, para poder cambiar esto. Entonces, al mismo tiempo revela, hablar desde la fachada es la capacidad de poder observar y de ser humilde, porque es incluso pedir verdad y decir ese es el punto de partida, que estoy sintiendo miedo, o sea, así como no tratar de hacer ese viraje muy nueva era, que ya lo hablamos, cambiar a nivel del pensamiento otra vez. No, esto no es así, y autoconvencerme, entre comillas, que en realidad no modifica nada, ¿no? O quizás algo maquilla, pero no. Realmente en la condición del alma no hay transformación.
No,
Bueno, eso revela.
tiene que haber, para que eso para que no hubiera sido nueva era en ese plan, o como o el curso de milagros, etcétera, tiene que haber realmente una conversación continua, ¿no? De apertura para ver la verdad de Dios acerca de las cosas, sí. O sea, para abrir primero la vulnerabilidad del corazón a lo que está pasando. Primero eso, pero sin impostura, sin ponernos otra vez a nosotros por delante y diciendo, yo ya sé cómo sanar esto y no sé cuánto. Sí.
Claro, exacto. Sí, sí. Eso.
Muy bueno.
Bueno. Entonces, sino, como veáis, si surge algo más o seguimos. Ahora va a venir esto.
Sorry in advance, this is a bit of a muddly question.
Soy los pajaritos ahí en Venezuela. Voy a silenciar.
I'm here busily trying to absorb all of this stuff and the layers and the names and get it all right in my head. And I'm conscious that, as usual, I'm getting overwhelmed with having to keep track of it all.
Yeah.
And not so long ago, I thought, this is ridiculous. It has been easier than this, I know. And I should just make the most of any emotion that I'm feeling and feel it, and don't even think about
So
it.
what's the emotion you're feeling right now?
Oh, I'm a bit frightened now.
You're overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed, yes.
That was the emotion you were feeling.
Yeah, I'm often like that.
So you're overwhelmed because there's all these messages coming at your head, and you're so used to using your head to sort everything out.
Yeah.
But there's this feeling inside of you now building is, I don't understand, I don't understand, I don't understand, I'm not getting this, I don't understand. So you're trying to understand it intellectually, but the emotion inside of you is, I don't understand. So allow yourself to feel that. Allow yourself to just start sinking into, I give up. I don't understand what the hell's going on. And let yourself feel that emotion. Because when you feel that emotion, all of a sudden you'll have some clarity in your head. And you'll be able to also get things there.
Y podrás también captar cosas allí, en tu cabeza. O sea, captar, entender, pillar cosas ahí.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm aware of that.
Yep.
I've done that.
No, you haven't.
Or maybe I didn't. Okay,
No.
that wasn't really my question.
I know, so keep going.
Esto lo dice Jesús, lo sé, que esa no era tu pregunta, sigue, así que sigue.
What I've been doing lately, and you said something before that I wondered if you could clarify. What I've been doing lately is if I feel something, I just think, oh, I just feel it. Can I work it out?
Yep.
So I feel sad, and I feel sad, and it's nice feeling sad actually, because when I'm sad, God is very close to me.
Exactly.
But then before you said something about sadness and anger, and I thought, am I not allowed to feel sad? Because I know that I must have a lot of anger. I'm learning that I must have a lot of anger. So does that mean feeling sad is avoidance?
No. See, now you're trying to get back into your mind again. What you're doing is right. The message you're saying to yourself is, I'm sad, I don't know what it's about, I'm allowed to feel it, so I feel it. That's good. And if you're sad and you're not crying though, then obviously there's a deeper layer you could go to in the sadness. Does that make sense? So the only thing I do, there's only one question I ask myself, and that is, what am I afraid of? I always just ask myself that question, what am I afraid of? Because it's always something I'm afraid of that stops me from going deeper.
When you're sad, you ask yourself what you're afraid of.
Whatever, when I'm sad but not crying.
There's crying and crying. It's like if I'm not wholeheartedly sobbing my eyes out like men and other people do.
Yeah.
Esto supongo que es en ese sentido de como que hay tipos de llantos, ¿no? Hay llantos y llantos.
Is that worthless?
No, it's not worthless, but there is a fear. Did you see the relationship? Look, nothing you do to help you access your emotion is worthless. So don't believe that. Everything you do to access an emotion is worth something. But if I am not sobbing my heart out when I'm sad, then I am not fully yet into the emotion. And there's a reason why, and that is I'm afraid of something. So that's why I keep asking myself, if I know I'm not in the deepest of the emotion, I just ask myself, what am I afraid of? And I talk to God about that. I say to God, what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid that you'll, do this, or they'll do that, or I'm afraid that this will happen, I'm afraid, and I'll just talk about that. So I might be just having a few tears, but not yet into the real deep emotion of it. And I just ask myself, what am I afraid of? But I don't even, now I just say to God, I start just talking to God, what I'm afraid of, about going deeper into this emotion. Because unless you are right in the emotion, there is something you're afraid of that's still stopping you from fully feeling the emotion.
So there's two things I can do when I'm crying a little bit. One is ask what I'm afraid of. What I've always done is said, okay, God, here I am, you can hear me now. Can you help me on a bit? So
Yeah.
is there a whole lot of things you can do?
No, that's all you need. That's all you need to do, because in that moment, things will start popping into your mind what you're afraid of. And if you just talk them back to God, like, this is what I'm afraid this is what I'm afraid of. When I was a kid, this happened, you start saying things, you'll actually start connecting more to the grief that's underneath the fear when you start expressing the fear. Does that make sense?
So it's always a fear, but it's not what I'm sad about, it's what I'm afraid of.
No, because if you were fully sad about that thing, you would be fully feeling the sadness and you'd be in a sobbing state. Does that make sense? So there's always a fear sort of capping that. And it's the same with all of our emotions in the end. If we're not fully experiencing the emotion just like a child would experience it, so, you take a lolly off the child and the child just is heartbroken, right? You imagine a 2-year-old and it's there sucking on a lolly and you grab the lolly out of its mouth and take it away. What happens to the 2-year-old? Oh, if they do a tantrum, and then what do they get into? Sobbing on the floor like this at the end of the world, right? Just because of a lolly being taken off them, right? So in the end, we will be like that with regard to the emotion. We will be, if we're in grief, we'll be in grief, like sobbing our heart out, and we'll feel it exiting us. We'll just feel this powerful emotion of grief just overwhelming us completely. If I'm not yet at that level of...
O sea, he dicho, sentiremos que está saliendo de nosotros, sentiremos saliendo de nosotros, exiting us. Y sentiremos esta poderosa emoción de la pena que nos abruma. Vale.
Processing the emotion, then there is still a fear, preventing the emotion from fully flowing through me. And the fear might be afraid of judgment of others. It might be afraid of an next door neighbour hearing me. It might be, it could be anything, just even simple like that. That your next door neighbours, like while I was processing a lot of my grief, my next door neighbour's home was 2 metres away from my bedroom. Now, of course, they heard everything I was doing. I could hear everything they were doing in their bedroom, so they certainly heard everything I was doing in mine. Huh? And so, you know, that was one of the fears that I had to allow myself to work through, that it didn't matter, you know, it didn't matter if they were going to even come and knock on the door. I had to work through that fear. And when I worked through that fear, I could more fully get into that emotion, that causal emotion. So yes, unless you're fully experiencing the emotion as it is in its raw state, there will be a fear stopping the full experience. Allow yourself to look at the fear and ask yourself about the fear and ask God about the fear, because processing the fear is about part of processing the emotion. It's about this process of clearing everything out of you, including every fear you have, will leave you as well. Does that make sense? So just those two things, there, nothing else. You don't need to do anything else. It's really, that's why it's so simple. You don't have to work it all out, you know? Yeah.
Esta es la Karen que salía en el taller de crianza, muy delgada, muy deprimida, por así decirlo, con la hija llorando muy fácilmente, muy sensible, la hija más grande que ella, 2 veces más grande que ella. Y así, ¿verdad? Por la voz y la forma de hablar. Porque había otra Karen en ese taller, pero esta es casi seguro la delgada, la que luego aparece también en más sitios.
We were always taught when we were children that Jesus was going to come and he was going to take the good people with him, and the bad people were going to stay behind. And it was also, my mother even made it a little bit better and said it was going to happen in our lifetime, which was right anyway.
Se refiere en nuestras vidas, en los momentos actuales.
And but what had happened was, in Europe we came home for lunch at school, and I came home one time and there was no one home. Everything was open, the doors were open, and my mother had gone, and I got into absolute panic because Jesus had come and he had taken everyone away and he left me behind. Absolute panic, and it was the ultimate rejection of God rejecting me because I wasn't good enough, because they were going to go to heaven. I was now going to go to hell and burn forever and ever and ever. Or there was also some story going around with a millstone around your neck or something and chucked into somewhere. And maybe I'm finding it really hard to connect with God, I suppose, in a way. I try, but I said, you're listening to me, are you taking notes of all this? You know,
Yeah, these kind of causal events when we're little, usually based around religion, have a huge effect on our relationship with God. And like I've heard of ones who, you know, they felt a real passion for God, and then they realised that anybody with a passion for God had to be a nun or a priest. You know, so they didn't want to be a nun or a priest, so they couldn't have a passion for God anymore. Then there's others who, you know, in the name of God, have had very, very unloving treatment, even abusive treatment, sexually abusive and violent treatment given to them. So obviously they then attribute that treatment to God. And so the very first emotions, my suggestion is the very first emotions that you deal with, if you can make them what they are about God and what you feel about God. It's going to help you greatly with the other emotions that you deal with. So the emotion that you feel is this deep feeling that God has rejected you. So allow yourself to start, pray about that emotion. Allow yourself to start stepping into that emotion as well. That, in fact, God doesn't want you. He wants everyone else but you. And allow yourself to start really stepping into that emotion and fully feel that feeling of rejection that you feel from God. The truth is that down the track you'll feel quite differently about God, but right at the moment, let yourself feel that emotion. Because that emotion will open a gateway into the other emotions you have, and then you'll also feel God helping you through the other emotions. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So if you can do that, you'll find that your relationship with God will get re-established. At the moment, it's very difficult for you to pray to someone who you feel has already rejected you.
That's right.
Yeah. So allow yourself to fully feel the rejection. Like, place yourself in a position where you feel that God has rejected you and just does not want you. Let yourself feel that emotion. And
in accessing childhood causal emotions, I've done a lot of processing on myself in sort of getting to the bottom of this belief that I have that I'm all alone in the world. And I sort of have a terror of finding an event that is so horrifying that would be just, a terrifying thing for me to remember, but I've actually never remembered any one terrifying event. And do you have to find sort of dredge until you find a terrifying event, or can it be just a whole series of, I've accessed fear of the dark and many other things in searching for why I feel alive. But I've never really come to any, pot of gold.
okay. How many of you feel there is one terrifying event that is in your life that you feel is there but you just can't access? Like, you'll find there's quite a number in the audience who feel this way. The answer is yes, there is one terrifying event that is in your life that you can't access. Right? For those people. Now, there is a deep level of terror surrounding accessing the event. And this applies to yourself. There is a deep level of terror around accessing the event. So I've had similar terrifying events to access. So you notice all of a sudden, me just confirming with you that there is an event is all of a sudden bringing up emotion to you. So your own soul is confirming the truth that there is this terrifying event that you will eventually access. Does that make sense? Now, just allow yourself to understand that that's true. That's the first step, is to allow yourself to understand the truth. The denial that you've had up to this point is that you haven't wanted to believe that that would be true. Right? And that's why it's hard to access the event. Now, most of these events surround abusive childhood situations, either sexual abuse, violent abuse, physical abuse, sorry. mental abuse even, but usually it's something physically painful that occurred that these kind of events surround. Allow yourself to understand that yes, there probably is this one event, and for many there could be more than one, but there'll be one that was the first one, which is the one you want to access anyway. And yes, allow yourself to see that it is there because you know it's there in your heart. It doesn't matter at this stage what it is. At first, just allow yourself to understand that what you suspect to be true is probably true. It is true. And allow yourself to acknowledge that. And also allow yourself to see that you will get to it if you keep accessing your emotions. And what that does too is start talking to God about that there is this one event and you know that there is this one event and you would like to access it but you're afraid. Say what you're feeling about it and you'll find that you'll access the event pretty rapidly. Now, almost everyone that I've suggested this to has usually accessed the event in the following 3 months. So they've usually got to a real core emotion about something that's been a very traumatic and terrifying event in their childhood. In some cases, it's been even an event like someone drowned and was resuscitated. Or, it could be an event like that as well, besides abuse. Sounds like I'm rattling again.
Están ahí. El audio se oye ahí y lo que ha comentado ahora es eso. Esas cosas no son de nosotros, sino del sonido, que está muy mal. Las interferencias que hay.
So, you understand that it could be anything to do with something like that even, not just abuse, an abuse issue.
Yeah, I'm just, it's really ready to come to it in the last month or so. It's manifesting as bad indigestion, heartburn.
That's it.
I'm overheating and it's really wanting to come out. But I just, I'm a practitioner, I'm a counsellor myself, but I'm just really struggling with pulling this one out. It's just really sitting heavily.
No sé cómo lo llamaréis. Por ahí el counseling es como que son, como si fuera un psicólogo, cosas así, ¿no? Luego lo podemos comentar para no perdernos del caso.
So the main thing at this point is now just to start telling yourself the truth. Yes, there is this event. Yes, I'm going to be able to do something about this event. And we're going to get to the bottom of this event, and whatever it is, you can actually handle it. At the moment, you don't believe you will be able to, but if with your relationship with God, you will be able to handle the event and the emotions surrounding the event. And it will actually change your law of attraction quite markedly once you release the emotion. And in fact, for anyone who's experienced childhood abuse or a childhood event that's been traumatic, when you release that event completely, your law of attraction will markedly change in lots of different areas. So there's a lot to look forward to in accessing the event too.
O sea, hay mucho que se pueda esperar. No utilizar el verbo desear en inglés, pero que se puede traducir así. O sea, hay mucho a esperar, hay mucho por lo que anhelar incluso, en cuanto a relativo a eso, a conseguir cuando se accede al evento, o sea, nos va a dar mucha, pero no se dice recompensa, sino que, o sea, hay muchas cosas que hay por delante, nos quedan por delante que mirar con agrado, por así decir, relativas a eso, a poder acceder al evento y que cambie la ley de atracción, sí.
AJ, I seem to be one of these really numb and it feels great to hear about all the ideas of anger, because it seems like, yes, there is an access point in, but it's something really foreign to me.
Yep.
You know, although when I left here last night, I got a really bad headache.
How many of you left with bad headache yesterday? Quite a few would have, yeah. It's quite a few left with bad headache.
Yeah. It was so bad, and I felt really nauseous, and my eyes started, you know. And I know, I guess that was a chance to do something with it, but I actually got very frozen, and all I could do was like be with the pain and keep still. That was it. That was my my usual way, I guess, of dealing with that. And I'd really like to just start. You know, I just feel like I have no idea where to. I hear the knowledge of where to start, but I can't connect at all.
So the issue is this feeling of none. That's the feeling you currently feel. And a friend of mine from, I think I've told this story a little before, but a friend of mine from Canada came over, and that's the feeling he felt. None. Anything, single situation. He was so numb, at the time he was 23 years of age, he'd never had a sexual experience in his entire life. He was numb to all sexuality. He was numb to the emotions of others. If you started talking to him about the emotions, he would just go straight into his intellect and start intellectualizing everything. And he's one of the 14. This man is Luke from the Bible. And the first thing he had to do was start connecting to, the fact that he was numb, and then start looking at why he was choosing to be numb. Because being numb is a choice. So again, the first question you ask is, what am I afraid of? And then what he did was one other thing that was really helpful. For 2 hours each day, he tried to allow himself to be angry. Now at the start he didn't do a very good job of it. It took him 3 weeks of doing this before he started accessing his first underlying sad emotion. So after a period of 3 weeks of 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night, beating the hell out of this rubber man that he had in front of him, and with boxing bag and bat and a baseball bat and all sorts of things, he eventually connected to anger within the first few days, and then he stayed in an angry state, in this sort of numb angry state, for nearly 3 weeks. And then he experienced his first underlying emotion. So if we're in a numb state, it's going to take effort to drill down. The pain that you experience is a result of an underlying emotion wanting to come up, but still the desire inside of yourself wanting to keep it down. Does that make sense? In the case of a headache, usually it's the underlying emotion of sadness wanting to come up, and I'm wanting to keep it back down, and that takes a lot of intellectual energy. And it just creates very, very, in fact, migraines are a big sign of needing to cry, or any headache, in fact, a big sign of needing to cry but not wanting to allow myself. So the second thing I would do is pray to God about why don't I want to allow myself to do it. So you start talking to God about that and ask God to give you assistance and you guys to give you assistance to work out why. And you'll find in doing that, over the next few weeks, some law of attraction events will occur showing you that you're afraid of something. And when you're afraid, so when you realise what you're afraid of, talk to God about that. I'm not dealing with that because of this emotion or whatever it is that you're feeling.
So is numbness always afraid of something?
And all layers that go around the causal emotion. So remember, I drew the causal emotion before. Here's our causal emotion. All of the layers that go around the causal emotion are all the result of fear. Otherwise, we'd experience that emotion. So they're all the result of fear. And remember what fear is. Fear is a false expectation appearing real to you. It's something that you think is really real. And honestly, in many cases, it has been real in the past. That's why we feel it's real, right? Of course, when we connect to God, we find out that a lot of things we thought was real in the past are not actually real. But before that time, these events that occur. So, for instance, if I was 3 years of age and I got punished for being angry, then is punishment a real fear? Yes, because when I was 3, I did get punished for being angry. So anytime I get angry, I'm going to feel afraid. Because I'm going to think that someone's going to punish me. So it's a real fear. It's not real anymore, but it is a real fear from the past. And that's the reason why we believe it.
Y así es como nos controlan los desencarnados, las otras personas, igual que lo que nos hacían a muchos niños, lo que nos habrán hecho o os habrán hecho los padres, ¿no? Para no te enfades, te castigan. Entonces tenemos un miedo y por lo tanto ese es el gancho para el control. Y por eso es lo que utilizan ahora, ¿no? En la televisión también, excitar esos miedos que en realidad no podemos dejarnos sentir porque porque hay un castigo por ahí, no sé cuántos, y se saca. ¿Queréis comentar? Terminamos este caso y volvemos porque aquí ha tocado esto nuevamente tan básico, pero tan...
Siento, Iván, que es mucho el énfasis puesto particularmente en el enojo, en reprimir esta expresión de disconformidad, digo, que vimos al principio, esta cuestión de que los niños son reflectores de las emociones reprimidas de los padres, pero particularmente lo que percibo, quizás porque mi vida fue así, justamente me sentí muy identificada con Lucas y dije, bueno, 2 horas de la mañana, 2 horas de la tarde, yo con el enojo no lo tengo permitido y lo voy a hacer más sistemático porque lo hice, no tiene así como esa regularidad. Pero digo, con respecto a eso, como que no está permitido, es como una sublevación, o sea, como un acto sí, de no sé cómo entender, cómo explicarlo, pero es como atreverte a opinar distinto, ¿no? De alguna forma, y ya no, porque está absolutamente condenado, o sea, que encima te enojas, como que encima tenés el tupé de enojarte, algo así, ¿no? Algo así, sí.
Sí. Y entonces eso se queda ahí como un miedo real, como ha dicho, pero que ya no es real. Se queda en el pasado, es eso, en el pasado fue real, que cuando nos enfadamos nos castigaban, y ahora pues eso, no nos permitimos muchas veces enfadarnos por miedo al castigo, y entonces lo cual justifica vivir en el enojo todo el rato, vivir en el enfado, en vez de procesar las penas que hay debajo de ahí. O sea,
Claro.
es muy perverso lo que se usa ahora, ¿no? De excitas a la gente para que se enfade, volviéndola loca, porque de un día para otro, aquí en España, de una semana a la siguiente, el gobierno decía, no pasa nada con el virus ese que hablan de que está ya en Italia o no sé cuántos. Aquí no pasa nada. Y a la semana siguiente ya los magnates o lo que sea les debieron llamar a los corruptos estos, les dijeron, no, vean, que ya toca, ahora hay que asustar. Y a la semana siguiente ya era la peor pandemia de todos los siglos, que todo es como siempre, todo es falso, claro, pero y ya, ala, vamos. Entonces vuelves loca a la gente, se van a enfadar sí o sí, pero claro, no se pueden permitir tampoco ellos mismos, ni se le va a permitir. Claro, y uno mismo se autorreprime ese enfado porque no sabe con qué tiene que ver. En realidad esos enfados nos permitirían sanar esas penas, digamos, de la infancia, desbloquearnos, pero se forma un caos que no sabe ni por dónde agarrar eso.
Qué interesante esto de que es un miedo real, porque así lo sentiste cuando niño, cuando éramos niños.
Sí. Se ha quedado bloqueado ahí, ya no tiene sentido, pero para nosotros es nuestra verdad personal ahí. Dios ve que tenemos bloqueada esa emoción, tenemos que hablar con Dios para, mira, es verdad que tengo esto ahí, porque si no estamos dándole la espalda todo el rato y por lo tanto no estamos usando los enfados para lo que tienen que servir. Y entonces nos provocan, los desencarnados en las élites y todo eso, nos provocan para que nos enfademos, o la ley de atracción o lo que sea, pero no sabemos para qué es, y en realidad es para procesar. Sí.
De que no te puedes revelar, o sea, no puedes de ninguna manera expresar lo que tu verdad, pues, o tu enfado, como dices tú. Eso, tu desagrado, no puedes, porque tienes un miedo real, entonces estamos bloqueados en ese aspecto. Qué bueno eso.
Sí, bueno, hay muchos aspectos ahí, sí, está muy ligada la cosa, sí. Cuando le metemos el lado colectivo e individual, o sea, si no miramos un caso concreto, es difícil a veces, ¿verdad? Pero
Y lo que recurrimos la mayoría, por lo menos yo veo con mis hijos, es a un analgésico. que acá en el kiosco de la esquina te venden y ya te sientes mejor. Supera el dolor y sí, vive tu vida. Algo así, las propagandas. Olvídate del dolor, trabaja tranquilo y disfruta tu día. Que el dolor de cabeza no te empañe.
Sí, fíjate la cantidad de gente que habrá estado en esto, aprovechando esto de los encierros, que han montado una epidemia de dolor de cabeza y de cosas así, con la matraca en la televisión todo el rato, el miedo, la gente que no sabemos el tema de las emociones, que hay que volver a ser como niños, tal como lo está contando Jesús, que ya por fin este es el mensaje, vale, pero claro, no sabemos eso. Entonces, ¿qué pasa? Es una incubadora de enfermedades brutales, porque tienes toda la gente enfadándose, primero mareada por un lado, miedo por otro lado. Ahora me dice una cosa, ahora no sé qué, o sea, es completamente una tortura psicológica, emocional, y consumiendo más ordenadores, más píldoras, no sé cuántos. Y entonces, claro, y esto lo que hace es las almas, que son muy poderosas, esto va creando un clima de guerra, un clima así, para luego poder ellos vender armas y vender más historias, más tecnología, más control, como lo que están haciendo con las inoculaciones, para justificar eso, para que la misma gente, lo que está pasando mucho, la misma gente ya no se quite, no quiera quitarse la mascarilla ni para atrás, ya da igual que lo digan o no lo digan, y cosas así. Sí.
¿Y cómo va ese miedo? Fíjate, ahora el que no se haya puesto las 5 vacunas o las 3, depende de cada país, bueno, una gran parte se preocupa porque no tiene esas inyecciones. Igual la mascarilla, tal cual. Ya eso está ahí introyectado, pues, y lo hicieron, pues, perfecto para
Sí, entonces la gente
control.
Imaginarse eso, ¿no? Todos esos dolores de cabeza que en realidad es para llorar cosas, pero sin embargo tenemos ahí que nos ponen la película por la que hay que llorar. O sea, la ficción se hace realidad. La ficción se hace realidad, como vimos en la entrevista de Alec Baldwin. Aquí no te vamos a dar el motivo por el que te duele la cabeza, es porque realmente hay una amenaza muy real, que antes eran, bueno, los terroristas, ahora luego son no sé qué, la gripe aviar, ¿no? Venga, todo esta. Y por eso, claro, por eso, sin embargo, el dolor de cabeza ese no es por lo que nos dice la tele o lo que sea, ¿no? Que es, claro, pero ellos, fíjate cómo coincide todo, ¿no? Como el hecho de tan completamente ridículo de repente todos los síntomas significan lo mismo.
¡Qué perfecto!
Es como, es súper vulgar, pero es increíble.
Ay, eso que acaba de decir, que todos los síntomas significan lo mismo, es tan cierto.
Sí, que lo han hecho así, ¿no?
¡Qué perfecto!
A la maniobra que es súper simplona y ha funcionado no, el bicho es cualquier cosa que te pase, ¿no?
Es cierto.
Si la gente no iba ahí con mucho cuidado, si tenían tratamientos de antes de que pasara el terrorismo mediático y político, si tenían tratamientos, tenías que ir al hospital diciendo, oye, que yo ya estoy de antes, a mí no me metáis ahora a vuestros líos, a hacerme esto que me estáis haciendo con la piedra de riñón o con no sé qué. Pero, claro, y ahora a las embarazadas, a todo el mundo, ¿no? Como decíais el otro día. Muy increíble. Y esto pasa periódicamente. Sí, de la gripe española que llamaron, que al parecer metieron inoculaciones súper venenosas en masa a los militares que estaban en las guerras. O sea, es un manejo para vender de las industrias químicas, todo este tema de las guerras, desde la Primera Guerra Mundial y quizá antes, es todo venta y venta, industrialización, venta de fertilizantes, luego se pasan al campo, los que habían vendido los gases de las guerras, o sea, es todo una locura muy, muy curiosa. Apocalíptica. Bueno, pues estamos aquí, repasamos lo que estaba diciendo, dice, es un miedo real, ya no es real, pero es un miedo real del pasado, y esa es la razón por la que lo creemos. ¿Seguimos?
Dale.
Bien.
Vale.
For many occasions, it is a real fear even of the future. So, like Mary's had some emotions she's been working through of why open her heart to me when there's a high likelihood this time round I'm going to die as well. Well, the last time I did, and it was shortly after she opened her heart to me too. Like, only a year and a half after, and then I died. Like, so why open her heart to me now? There's a real threat of the future that might happen.
I remember as a sort of a 20-year-old having a feeling of, you know, cloaking my heart, thinking that is never going to happen to me again. But then that must also have been, you know, it wouldn't have happened at 20, it would have happened
Earlier.
Yeah.
Exactly. And at 20...
Si no me hubiera pasado a los 20, me habría pasado antes. Le completa la frase ahí Jesús, o sea, si no me... Y me habría pasado, que es un modo como se usa a veces, ¿no? No me habría pasado a los 20 y me habría pasado antes. Entonces, estamos ahí, la sensación de que el corazón estaba cerrado, nunca me iba a pasar otra vez. Ahora van a concretar de qué están hablando. Lógicamente ya lo podéis intuir, creo que es algo de una relación, no vuelvo a abrir mi corazón, no sé cuántos. Vale.
Was your last straw. That was the last time that you were ever going to let your heart be open again. So go back to that event now. So it's a good way to trace back into emotion as well. But allow yourself to see that actually, you know, it gets back to that question that you had about vulnerability. Allow yourself to be vulnerable, at least with God. And this is why our relationship with God can heal us completely. Our relationship with others has the potential to heal, but it also has the potential to harm. Because the other person can be in a harmful state. Does that make sense? So if you picture it this way, that here's you, right? Here's some other people around you. They are going to be in different states of error. But God, who can connect to you, is not in a state of error. So God has no error. No error with love. God has no error. These people have error. If I interact with these people when I'm trying to heal myself, obviously, while it's probably good for my law of attraction, there is also the potential of harm. Because these people are in error, I'm in error, there's a potential I'll harm them, and there's a potential they'll harm me. But if I deal with every emotion, like this issue of being vulnerable, with God, there's no potential harm with God if I allow myself to be vulnerable. Can you see that? So if you can allow, you know, that heart that you have that you wrapped up and said, no one's going to hurt me again when you're 20, if you can at least allow yourself to start talking with God about unwrapping your heart towards God. Rather than doing it with others first, start doing it with God and see what happens. And as that God's love enters you and softens you, you'll find you'll be able to start doing it with others.
Todo lo que llevamos ya, bastante. Ya casi está acabando la primera parte, lo que pasa es que está unido en un vídeo de 3 horas 47.
Yes, and the only, and my understanding, because I've had a go at this and I find it really difficult, accessing anger through beating things up. I mean, I hadn't had it, but it was just like, you know, after ranting and raving and saying, how do I feel? I feel fine, you know.
Yep. When you're in a numb state, which is the state that you'll close yourself down towards, you'll find that it's going to take more than one time to actually start accessing what's underneath it. You can't expect years and years of suppression to be undone in one little session trying to get to some anger.
Is that the only way in to anger?
Usually numb covers fear, but in between numb and fear might be anger.
But maybe
not. You know, all of us have different personality. All of us have a different way that we address things of what happened when we were little. There's a high likelihood there will be anger in between. But there may not. There may be just some fears capping the sadness-based emotions. Right? But to be frank with you, for you to go into a state of rigidity when you were 20 with your heart, there's got to be some anger there. Does that make sense? So if you can take yourself back to that state, how you felt, even the anger you felt in that state. Like, why did you close down your heart? Why did you put this rigid sign on my heart saying, no one's ever going to get in there again? There's got to be some anger-based feelings related to that. And someone said their hand up for someone. But let's go to Morgan, just behind.
I know that I have a lot of anger with my biological mother. I don't know, because there have been so many situations, I don't know where to take it back to. And because I am so young, you know, like, do I have to take it, like, how far I have to take it back to?
With yourself, Morgan, you know you've been in your anger with your biological mother for some time. So the next step you need to be able to take is to get deeper than the anger and allow yourself to feel the sadness of her rejection. Does that make sense? And that's the thing you're choosing to not do. You don't want to let yourself feel that powerless state of being rejected. So what's happening for yourself is you have this anger feeling inside of you towards your mum. You've experienced it a lot already. My feeling is that you need to allow yourself now to dig deeper. But there's a reason why you go into anger rather than digging deeper, and that is that you feel so hurt, and you feel that it's going to be so pointless. She's never going to love you. So what's the point of releasing it? Now, the point of releasing it is that you will be free of it. In other words, it won't dictate to you your life anymore. That's the point of releasing it. At the moment, because you feel this anger, it's like her life is still affecting your life. How she feels about you is still affecting you. And you see that? Whereas when you get below and you actually release the grief, how she feels about you will no longer affect you. And when that occurs, you won't feel angry with her anymore, but you probably won't have a relationship with her either. But you won't feel angry with her and you won't feel sad anymore about it. The reason why you're getting into the anger still is because you do not want to feel that you'll never have a relationship with her. But that's probably the truth for some time to come, until she works through her emotions. Does that make sense? And that's the emotion you're avoiding.
¿Qué estás? Le está diciendo a ella.
What you are hoping still, there's a spark of hope in you still, that mum is going to love me. She's going to work out she's done the wrong thing. And she's going to love me. Does that make sense? And that's why you're getting angry, because there's that spark of hope that you keep hoping from you keep hoping, and she doesn't show that back to you. And so you get angry with her for not showing it back. But and she doesn't show that back to you, and so you get angry with her for not showing it back.
Te enfadas con ella por no demostrarte eso, por no devolvértelo. Esa expectativa está ahí, eso hay que ponerlo así, mejor, un poco mejor. Sí que te enfadas en ella por no devolverte eso. Ponemos esa expectativa, esa esperanza, no recibimos porque la expectativa es en realidad para mantenernos enfadados, aunque creemos que no, y nos enfadamos por eso.
But what that's covering is just this deep feeling of grief. My mother does not love me. And right at the moment, your mother does not love you. And that's the emotion you need to let yourself feel. And you're allowed to feel that, because she does not love you. Down the track, she may work out, that she'll be very regretful about that at some point and start to love you. But at the moment, that's the feeling. She does not love you. Right up there.
Hi, I was just wondering, do you believe that serious illness is actually manifested as emotion?
And other way around. Emotions that are denied manifest serious illnesses.
Okay, so in saying that, because I have cancer,
Yep.
and medicine has given me no hope.
That's right.
And I actually, you know, am on the path to do whatever I can because I have 2 small children, so I'm very determined.
Yep.
And I just wanted to know how do you actually go about, because we've obviously got, you know, a series of emotions along the way, and 2 years ago we lost our son, so it was a hospital error and that sort of thing, so I've obviously manifested that as well, and I just want to know, is it possible, I guess I'm looking for...
It's possible to cure your cancer by dealing with your emotions. The big issue with cancer is that there is already a lot of emotional suppression to create the cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So do you mind me asking where the cancer is?
No, cervix.
So
and it's, yeah, spread.
Okay. The issue that you're facing is that you have some very, very deep anger and grief with sexuality and with sex itself. And that's what's affecting cancer in that region for you. If I can go through what cancer is, and I'll write it so that you can see it at the back. So cancer, if we put that in brackets, it's an illness. It's a life-threatening illness. Underneath cancer, so cancer is resulted from suppression. We're suppressing something emotionally. The suppression will be a suppression of some kind of emotion. Now, usually it is the suppression of anger. Right? Now, under the anger, there is usually a fear. And under the fear, there is usually the real emotion, which is usually going to be a grief-based emotion, and usually with cancers, there is also related emotions of shame.
Hay también, dice, añade eso. Y usualmente con los cánceres también hay emociones relacionadas con la vergüenza. Vamos a ver aquí.
Self-shame, so feeling bad about yourself. Now, where you get the cancer depends upon what emotion is being suppressed. So, for example, if I've got cancer in a breast, then it would depend on whether it started in the left breast or the right breast as to what emotion I'm suppressing. If there'll be an over-nurturing thing that I'm trying to do, which is resulted about wanting to get love from that particular, if it's a left side, it'll be from a female.
Querer obtener amor, si es el lado izquierdo, ese particular será de parte de una mujer, ese querer obtener amor.
The right side will be from the male. If I have cancer in the lungs, it will be some deep sadness that's occurred that I've suppressed. And this is why many smokers get lung cancer. Because they smoke to suppress deep sadness that they don't want to feel. And then they cover that with a lot of deep anger about what they're sad about. And then, of course, that creates the cancer in the lungs. For many men, there'll be a prostate cancer. Prostate cancer is very similar to cervical cancer in a woman. Prostate cancer for men is very similar in that it's to do with the opposite gender. It's to do with some deep grieving to do, that's covered then by some fear and covered by some anger about the opposite gender. And about sex with the opposite gender. In each case, usually all of these things are based around the underlying grief is related to usually these childhood events. So there'll be things that have happened in your childhood related to sexuality that you yet have grieved, that you need to allow yourself to grieve, but because they are powerful events, you've got some fear about grieving. And you're worried about that, and so then that's created the anger, and then because you don't allow the anger to be there, you've suppressed the anger, and that then creates the body pain. Does that make sense as to how it's created? Mm-hmm. So the way to work through it is firstly to step into the anger that you feel about sex and sexuality and the opposite sex. Then ask yourself questions about what you're afraid of. And then eventually you'll get down, and you can do this quite rapidly, get down into the grief that you feel of some events, and I think you're aware of some of the events that happened in your childhood that may have caused you to have this feeling regarding sexuality that you have. Now, there's nothing that's triggering your mind? How does your mother feel about men? What does she do? No, for men.
For men?
You say your mum loves men.
Well, she's married to my dad and stuff, and they're very happily married for a very long time.
And who is the primary carer in the relationship, do you think?
Probably Dad.
Okay, so what emotion does your mum have towards your dad? Does Dad do everything Mum wants?
Yeah, controls.
So Mum is the controlling person in the relationship?
Yeah.
You see that? Mm-hmm. So you would have grown up in this family environment where your mother is the controlling person in the relationship. Can you see why she would want to control a man? So she doesn't want to be open and vulnerable and have an equal relationship with a man.
Y tener una relación de igual a igual. Ahí falta esa palabra, una equal relation, como equitativa, digamos. De igual a igual.
She tells herself she does, but she doesn't. She wants to have the controlling relationship. So she has some emotions of being special, you know, and the man makes her feel special and wanted and all those kind of emotions. So there must be an emotion inside of your mother of some deep anger towards men to cause her to want to control men to get exactly what she wants. Now, can you see anything related to your relationship with men in there?
Well, I guess I can be a control freak, but you know, to be honest.
Okay, so there's feelings you want from men, and you feel men should give you those feelings, and that's the anger level that you're experiencing. There's a lot of anger in that that you're unaware of, that you've suppressed, because your mother has suppressed it in herself. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And how did your father treat you? Did he treated you like sort of like a princess?
Yes.
Yep. And so that's caused you to feel what about men? That men should treat you like a princess. Exactly. And you feel totally justified with that emotion at the moment. But it's not an actually loving emotion. So the key is to start experimenting a little with this emotion and start working through how forceful you feel about that inside of yourself and why that's the case. Because this is the cause of the cancer.
O sea, ¿cuán de imperativa te sientes sobre eso, de querer forcejear ahí, obligar, cuán en ese sentido de contundente, por así decir, si es que lo tuviera? Pues esa es la causa.
There's grief surrounding that issue, surrounding your mum as well in a connection. And there's also a connection with a spirit who's connected with you, who has the same grief in herself. So there's I don't know if you believe in spirits or not.
Yeah, like a grandmother's spirit.
This is a spirit who has the same kind of feelings you have towards men. And this spirit also passed with cancer. Yep. Okay, so your grandmother is actually affecting your cancer at the moment. Well,
I had a dream about it about 3 months ago.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's the combination of your own emotion, which has been a long-term running emotion in the women's side of your family, your mother's family, and that long-term running emotion, and actually it's also been in the father's side of your family with the women in his family as well. And because of this long-term emotion, you have that emotion in you, and your grandmother is very connected with you. She feels a strong rapport with you. But she actually, I believe she might have even passed with the same problem, did she? Or
Well, she had a lung cancer.
Lung cancer.
But, yeah, I guess I don't know what type of cancer it was in terms of cell-wise when I talk about cancer, but it does normally appear in the lung and never the cervix.
Yeah. Yeah. So there is some really deep feelings you need to work through about that, and it's a family-based generational feeling that's been impressed. And the core of it is this emotion you have that men should treat me like a princess. So if you can start allowing yourself to connect to that emotionally, you'll start connecting with why one of the feelings you have that you feel like is, well, yes, of course they should. It's one of the feelings I can feel back when I say those words, right?
Yeah.
And then allow yourself to go, well, why should they? So why should they treat you any different than you treat them? Why should they, like, sure, treat a woman like a princess, but does that mean you've got to treat him like a prince? Does your mother treat your father like a prince? Or is it just your father treating your mother like a princess? And so can you see there's some imbalance in their relationship there? Which obviously is a multi-generational family thing that has been impressed upon yourself. Now, it is definitely related to sex and sexuality, this issue, coming from generationally through your families. So you probably, if you ask your mum about her mother and her grandmother, you may find that there's some sexual injuries that they've had while they were on earth, related to this emotion being in you girls now, your mum and yourself. Does that make sense? Now, if you allow yourself to connect to those things, you'll find you'll be able to get to the cause of the cancer. The problem with cancer illnesses is that we don't like looking at ourselves very much because we think, well, you know, what I've found is that many people with cancers that I've been talking to don't want to get into the emotion of how dominating and domineering they can be. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And that's something inside of yourself to just be aware of. Is if you can allow yourself to feel that controlling part of you, because it's that controlling part of you which is driven by some of these emotions and a core emotion towards men, that controlling part of you is actually generating a cancer as well. And it's about releasing that, and that will help you work through the issue. Is that?
Thank you.
I can't really say too much more without having a try.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you very much.
And Linda, thanks. Lisa, sorry.
Hi, it's just about this girl that was just talking.
Yeah.
Why is the disease showing up in her and not her mother when the emotion is coming from her mum? Because quite often the children are dying, but the parents are living.
Usually it's because the child is more sensitive emotionally than the parent. There is also things to do with the child's personality that are involved with it as well. And then there is also the combination of emotions coming from both lineages being repressed. And then there's also the added issue of spirit attachment. So the truth probably is that grandmother is not that attached to the mother, but more attached to the granddaughter. That's one issue. So what I'm basically saying is the reason why it happens in one generation and not another is that there are so many a variety of factors that actually make it different for the child and for the parent. Now, in your family's case, there is, on both lineages, this injury exists. The reason why your father, for example, is placating the woman all the time and treating the woman like a princess to often his own detriment is because he was taught to do that by his own parents and what happened in their relationship. Does that make sense? So it's sort of like, if you can think of it now, there's the mother side of the family coming down towards you, and then there's the father side of the family coming down towards you, and both of them had the same emotions. So now those emotions are going to sort of like double up in you. Does that make sense? Because they're unhealed. So there's a lot of variety of factors which will occur, which will create the problem in the child when the mother or the father may not necessarily have had it. I've seen many cases where the child dies of cancer, and then later on, 20 years later, the parents finish up dying of the same form of cancer. And the reason why that happens is because the child has died because there's this concentration of emotions from both the male and female lineages in the child, but the emotions still existed to a lesser extent in the parents. And so that's happened in times as well where we find that occurring. And this is also why most cancers have a higher occurrence in certain family lines. Because it's actually the emotions in those family lines that generate the disease. Does that make sense? And just straight across.
Not long ago, we lost a son to cancer.
Yep. How old was he?
43.
Yep.
And
what form of cancer, do you mind me asking?
In the groin or liver. It started in the groin, then it moved on into other areas.
Right. So it's testicular cancer or prostate cancer, but no, just in the groin, in the muscle areas of the groin.
That area.
Okay, in the lymph areas of the groin or?
Yes, with a large lump.
And which side of the body, can you remember? I'm sorry I'm asking you all these things, I know you're still grieving.
Right-hand side.
Right-hand side.
Sounds better than I do. My question is to do with anger.
Yep.
It took him about a year to die, but when we were aware that he was going to die, we've been praying to God and doing all those things.
Yeah.
I got very, very angry. And I raised to God and I swore on him and I did all those things that I guess I was supposed to do. He died, and after he died, there was no anger to God. Sort of a sense of peace.
Yeah.
There's a great sense of grief, which is very, very under control.
Yeah.
And what I was wondering if it'd be easy to control that crying, which is the main thing. You can't think of the boy without crying.
Yeah.
Whether addressing maybe anger I still have in me might improve that.
I feel you addressed a lot of the anger you had during the situation. The issue that you're facing now, I believe, is the grief. And if I can just make some notes about your grief, if you like. The issue with grief, particularly with losing children, when we're grieving, there's a number of truths that we're not yet facing at an emotional level, that we don't yet believe in our heart. And what we need to do is allow ourselves to actually work through releasing the error through our grief. Until, once we release the error through our grief, we'll eventually get to those truths.
Atravesando nuestra pena. Sí, nuestro.
So if I could describe some of the truths, for example. For instance, one truth is your son is still alive. Another truth is that he's probably enjoying himself a bit more now that he's passed than he was when he was here on earth, riddled with the cancer. Another truth is that he has an eternal existence, as do yourself. Now these are really basic, what I would call down the bottom here, I'll write them as core divine truths. So these are truths. These are truths. The reason why we grieve is because we do not understand at the emotional level the truth. Now, the reason why we do that is because there are lots of other emotions in between getting to this place and this place. And this place is actually, the grief is the mechanism by which we can accept truth. Do you understand what I mean by that? It's through our grief that these core truths will eventually become a part of you. And when they become a part of you, you will actually get to a point where you're no longer grieving and you'll know in your heart these truths to be true. And so you'll be able to think of your son with joy and happiness and not with grief. Right? So the grief is the tool by which you will eventually accept these truths. Now, at the moment for yourself, you're trying to control the extent of the grief. The grief is actually, and this is going to be, some of the things I might say now might sound a little cruel, but I want to be straight with you about, the grief is actually not about the loss of your son. The grief is about what losing your son means to you. Can you see there's a difference between the two? In other words, losing your son has triggered inside of you grieving-based emotions related to your own childhood in some way. And things that you lost during this period of time of your growing up and into your adult life. And what this grief is doing is triggering those events, and that's why as soon as you think of your son, what's the next thing you think of? There's something you think of next.
One thing I did mention, I should, that towards the end I was just so threatened, so upset by the fact that it should have been me. I come from a history of both sides of my family dying of cancer.
Yes.
And I've got all the outward signs that I should have, and he didn't.
There's a very, very strong personal feeling of guilt in you that it should have been you. And in fact, that emotion covers over some very, very strong childhood events where you were blamed for lots of things in your life. And in fact, your grief is actually helping you access this guilt and then accessing. I won't write down what those emotions are because you will need to allow yourself to discover them in your childhood. But that's what's actually happening. And so your son's death has triggered in you all these terrible feelings of guilt that you have about yourself and your life and how it should have been you who passed. And that's why the grieving is taking a while to work your way through. The key for you to do it is to allow yourself now to go into what you feel guilty about and talk to God now about those things. What is it that you feel guilty about? You feel guilty about living on earth. He's not here anymore. Feel guilty about he had a family, I gather.
Porque él tenía una familia. Porque no por tener él, el padre, una familia, sino el hijo, o como se ve ahora.
And you feel guilty about he had children too, I gather. And you feel guilty about what's happened to the family, the children. And if it happened to you, you feel that none of those things would have happened to them. And so there's a lot of feelings in there where you're taking on the blame, and that comes from a lot of things from your childhood, and one of those where you were blamed for, that you need to allow yourself to actually work your way through. When you work your way through that, you will no longer have this terrible feeling of guilt when you think of your son's passing, and you'll actually then be able to grieve the actual loss of your son and himself in the sense of your relationship. You feel you've lost your relationship, and once you do that, you'll get to some core truths that actually your son's around you all the time. And he's quite fine now, he's not physically ill. And, you know, he can see what's going on with his family, he can see what's going on with you, and that he loves you and cares about you. You'll start feeling all those truths inside of you. And so when you think of him, he'll often be present, and you'll feel him present. And at some time in the future, you may even finish up talking to him after you've worked your way through those emotions. Does that make sense? At the moment, it's going to be very difficult for you to hear him or talk with him, because as soon as you even speak his name, this process happens inside of you. So allow yourself to actually go through the process into the emotion of it, and you'll get to the core of it, which will all be revolving around how much you were blamed, how much you took the blame as a result of being blamed in your childhood life and coming into your adult life. And does that feel, you can feel some of the things in amongst that? And then you'll be, when you grieve, you'll actually, the grief will feel, you'll feel a sense of peace of it. And once you get to that stage, you'll also understand the truth at the heart. So rather than it just being an idea that your son's alive, you'll feel it in your heart. Rather than it just being an idea that you can communicate to him, whenever you want to talk to him, you just open your mouth and talk to him. You know what I mean? And you'll feel that his reflection of emotion, if not anything else, and you may actually feel at some point other things from him as well. You may even hear his voice at one point and know that everything's fine with him.
Bueno, ¿cómo estáis?
Emocionada.
Sí, esta última parte, ahí tenemos mucho ya.
Wow, eso es muy, 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 muy. Con esas dos últimas, de la señora y este señor.
Sí, son demasiadas cosas. Sí, lo del cáncer, lo de... Sí, cómo se ha enlazado todo, además.
Dios, qué cosa tan maravillosa.
Ahora nos toca darle golpes a las cosas.
Ay, Iván, esto es mucho. Mucho que procesar.
Bueno. Sí, seguimos, por ejemplo, mañana, que llevamos ya 2 horas y pico, para no asustar mucho.
Sí.
Mañana o pasado.
Sí, está bien, Iván.
Y lo vamos terminando. Queda una
Queda poco, 15, 20 minutos.
No, queda, está todo junto, las 2 sesiones.
Ajá.
Y son 3 horas 47 minutos. Aquí en el PDF vamos más o menos por la página 30. Aquí está Edwin pintándolo del... Este es el tema del fallecido de cáncer. Aquí esas cosas que le reprocharon, esos eventos.
Dios santo, qué cosa tan maravillosa. Quedamos en el 6-1 para la próxima.
Sí.
Ok.
Esta página 31, la 6-1, sí. Y ahí...
Quedamos en la página 31. Ok, voy a...
Sí, hasta ya no se nos...
Ay, Iván, cómo eso remueve hasta lo profundo.
Sí. Bueno, pues...
El amor para poder penetrar, o sea, para poder comprender la situación del otro es maravilloso.
Tenemos ahí... Sí. Bueno, pues despediros si queréis y dejo de grabar.
Bueno, sí.
Nos despedimos del amado público ya y muchas gracias y ya vemos.
De verdad que doy profundas gracias por que se haya presentado esta oportunidad de sanar, de seguir empezar a estar conscientes pues del trabajo que hay que hacer.
Sí, de todo eso que está ahí bloqueado.
Sí, que está bloqueado, que hay que liberar. Gracias.
Bueno, pues dejo